It was a chilly autumn morning at JFK International Airport. The air smelled faintly of coffee and jet fuel, the kind of smell that makes you feel like you're about to start an adventure. People rushed around with their suitcases, some looking stressed, others excited. Among them was a black woman in her mid-40s dressed casually in jeans, a simple sweater, and sneakers. She didn't stand out in the crowd, at least not in the way people expected someone traveling first class to stand out. This woman had been up since dawn, going over emails on her phone as she waited for her flight. She wasn't just any traveler. She was someone who had worked hard to get where she was today. Her name doesn't matter right now. What matters is what happened next. Let's call her the passenger for now. This passenger had booked a first-class ticket months ago. It wasn't something she did often, but this time she wanted to treat herself. After all, running your own airline isn't easy. Years of sleepless nights, tough decisions, and fighting against stereotypes had finally paid off. She deserved a little comfort, didn't she? When it was time to board, the passenger grabbed her carry-on bag and headed toward the gate. As she handed over her boarding pass, the flight attendant gave her a quick once-over. Jeans? Sneakers? Really? The look on the attendant's face said it all. To them, this woman didn't fit the image of a first-class traveler. They glanced at the ticket again, then back at her clothes, clearly skeptical. "Are you sure this is correct?" the attendant asked, holding up the boarding pass like it might somehow explain things better if they stared at it long enough. The passenger blinked, taken aback. "Yes," she replied calmly. "That's my ticket." But the attendant wasn't convinced. Maybe there had been a mix-up. Maybe this woman accidentally booked economy instead of first class. Whatever the reason, the attendant decided to double-check. And when they couldn't find anything wrong with the ticket itself, they called over a supervisor. Things escalated quickly after that. Before the passenger knew it, security guards were being summoned, and whispers spread among the other travelers, waiting in line. "What's going on?" one man muttered to his companion. "I don't know," came the reply. "But it looks bad." The passenger tried to stay calm, even as the situation spiraled out of control. She explained herself again, showing her ID and confirming her seat assignment. But no matter what she said, it seemed like no one believed her. In their eyes, she didn't belong in first class, not because of anything she'd done, but because of how she looked. Eventually, the decision was made. The passenger would have to leave the plane. Security escorted her off, ignoring her protests. Passengers watched silently as she stepped aside, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Some shook their heads, while others snapped photos or videos, sensing drama. For the passenger, though, it wasn't just about being kicked off the flight. It was about being judged, not for who she was, but for what people assumed she was based on her appearance. Once she was back in the terminal, standing alone with her thoughts, the weight of what had just happened hit her. How could this happen? Wasn't buying a ticket supposed to guarantee her a seat regardless of what she wore? Why did anyone care so much about her clothes? These questions swirled in her mind as she replayed the scene over and over. She felt angry, hurt, and humiliated. But, most of all, she felt determined. Determined to prove that this moment wouldn't define her. Little did anyone know this incident was about to set off a chain reaction that would change everything. For her, for the airline, and maybe even for the entire industry. As the passenger stood there, staring out at the planes taking off into the crisp autumn sky, she realized something important. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every person who had ever been underestimated, judged, or dismissed because of how they looked. And she wasn't going to let it slide, not without making sure something good came out of it. After the humiliating incident at the gate, the woman found herself sitting alone in a quiet corner of the terminal. Her hands were trembling slightly as she clutched her boarding pass and ID, now crumpled from being handled so many times. She stared blankly out the window, watching planes taxi down the runway and disappear into the horizon. The noise of the bustling airport faded into the background as memories from her past began flooding back, memories that shaped who she was today. Growing up, life hadn't been easy for her, She came from a modest neighborhood where money was tight and opportunities were scarce. Her mother worked tirelessly, juggling multiple jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Despite the challenges, her mom always encouraged her to dream big. "You can do anything you set your mind to," she'd say, even when it felt like the world was stacked against them. As a child, she was fascinated by airplanes. Every time one flew overhead, she'd stop whatever she was doing and look up, imagining where it might be headed. That fascination turned into a passion when she saved up enough allowance to buy her first model airplane. It wasn't much, a tiny plastic toy with detachable wings, but to her, it represented something bigger. It symbolized freedom, possibility, and escape from the limitations others tried to impose on her. But pursuing her dreams didn't come without obstacles. When she told her high school counselor she wanted to study engineering, they raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure that's realistic?" they asked, implying that maybe she should aim lower. At university, she often found herself the only black woman in her classes, surrounded by peers who doubted her abilities simply because of how she looked. Professors sometimes overlooked her contributions during group projects, assuming she wouldn't have much to offer. But she refused to let anyone dim her light. Instead, she poured every ounce of energy into proving them wrong. Her journey wasn't just about academics, it was also about survival. There were late nights spent studying by candlelight because the electricity had been cut off at home. There were mornings when she skipped breakfast so she could afford bus fare to get to class. And there were moments when self-doubt crept in, whispering cruel lies about her worth. But through it all, she held on to one truth. She belonged wherever she chose to be, no matter what anyone else thought. Years later, after earning her degree and working tirelessly in the aviation industry, she founded her own airline. It started small, a single plane flying between two cities, but grew rapidly thanks to her vision of making air travel accessible and inclusive. She believed deeply that everyone deserved to feel valued, whether they were passengers or employees. Under her leadership, the airline became known not only for its efficiency, but also for its commitment to treating people with dignity and respect. Now, sitting in the terminal, she couldn't help but laugh bitterly at the irony of the situation. Here she was, the founder and CEO of an airline empire, being judged and humiliated by her own company's staff. They saw her casual clothes and assumed she didn't belong in first class, never stopping to consider that appearances don't tell the full story. For a moment, she wondered if all her hard work had truly made a difference. Had she broken barriers, or were new ones still standing in her way? Anger bubbled inside her, but it quickly gave way to determination. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever been underestimated because of their looks, their background, or their circumstances. She thought about the young girl back in her old neighborhood, dreaming of becoming an engineer despite the odds. What message would this incident send to her? Would she see it as proof that society still judges people unfairly? Or would she realize that setbacks can be turned into stepping stones? With renewed resolve, the woman pulled out her phone and dialed her assistant. As she waited for the call to connect, she glanced around the terminal. Passengers hurried past, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her. Some carried expensive luggage, while others lugged worn duffel bags. Some wore designer suits, while others dressed in simple jeans and sneakers. Yet each of them carried their own stories, their own struggles, and their own dreams. No one walking through that airport knew everything about the person beside them, and yet, judgments were made constantly, carelessly, cruelly. When her assistant answered, she spoke calmly, but firmly. "I need you to contact the executives at our airline immediately," she said. "Tell them I'm waiting at gate 27. Oh, and make sure they bring security footage from earlier." Hanging up, she leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. The humiliation of being kicked off the plane still stung, but she refused to let it break her. Instead, she decided to channel her pain into action. If this incident exposed flaws within her own company, then she would use it as an opportunity to create real change. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt dismissed or devalued. As she sat there, planning her next move, she noticed a group of travelers nearby discussing what had happened. One man shook his head in disbelief, saying loudly, "Can you believe they treated her like that? Just because she didn't look rich?" Another traveler chimed in, agreeing that it was unacceptable. Their voices carried across the terminal, drawing attention from other passengers. Some nodded in agreement, while others pulled out their phones to record the unfolding drama. For the first time since the incident, the woman allowed herself a small smile. Maybe this moment wouldn't just expose prejudice, it might also inspire people to question their assumptions and demand better. After all, change rarely comes without discomfort, and if her experience could spark a conversation about fairness and equality, then perhaps it was worth it. Within minutes, a flurry of activity erupted near the gate. Executives from her airline rushed toward her, their faces pale with panic. When they realized who she was, the atmosphere shifted instantly. But instead of lashing out, she stood up, looked them straight in the eye, and said, "Let's use this as an opportunity to learn." The moment the airline executives arrived at the terminal, you could feel the tension in the air. They approached her cautiously, like someone walking on thin ice, unsure of what to say or do. Their faces were a mix of shock, guilt, and sheer panic. It was clear they hadn't expected this situation to spiral out of control the way it had. For them, it was supposed to be a routine boarding process, just another day at work. But now, they were staring directly into the eyes of the woman who owned the entire operation. The woman they had humiliated. One of the executives, a middle-aged man with a suit that screamed corporate ladder climber, stepped forward first. His voice trembled as he tried to apologize. Ma'am, we're so sorry for the misunderstanding. This is, well, it's completely unacceptable. We'll make sure something like this never happens again." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked at him, then at the others standing behind him, their expressions ranging from awkward to mortified. She could see the fear in their eyes, the kind of fear that comes when people realize they've made a colossal mistake. And while part of her wanted to unleash every ounce of anger she felt, she chose not to. Instead, she took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and said, "Let me ask you something. What made you think I didn't belong in first class?" Her question hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and unignorable. The executive stuttered, his face turning red. I don't know, ma'am. It was just a judgment call based on appearances, I suppose." "A judgment call," she repeated, her tone calm but cutting. "So you judged me based on how I was dressed? Did it ever occur to anyone to check my credentials before deciding I wasn't worthy? Or did you just assume I didn't fit your idea of what a first-class passenger should look like?" No one answered. They couldn't. The truth was written all over their faces. Yes, they had judged her unfairly. Yes, they had let bias guide their actions. And no, they didn't have a good excuse for it. By now, word of the incident had spread throughout the terminal. Passengers were gathering around, drawn by the commotion. Some recognized the executive's frantic demeanor and pieced together what was happening. Others whispered among themselves, speculating about who this woman really was. When someone finally shouted, "Wait, isn't that the CEO of Skyward Wings?" The room erupted in murmurs of disbelief. Suddenly, everyone was watching. Phones came out, cameras clicked, and video started rolling. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Here was the head of a major airline company, a black woman who had built an empire from scratch, being treated like she didn't deserve basic respect. It was the kind of story that makes headlines, sparks debates, and forces people to confront uncomfortable truths. As the crowd grew larger, the woman stood tall, radiating quiet confidence. She didn't need to raise her voice to command attention. Her presence alone was enough. Turning to the passengers, she addressed them directly. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice steady and strong. "It's about every person who has ever been judged unfairly because of how they look, where they come from, or what they wear. We live in a world where assumptions are made in seconds, and those assumptions can hurt people deeply." Her words resonated with the audience. Heads nodded in agreement, and a few people even clapped. One older woman stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," she said, "but thank you for speaking up. You're giving a voice to those of us who've been too afraid to say anything." The woman smiled softly, appreciating the gesture. Then she turned back to the airline executives who were still standing there, looking like deer caught in headlights. "You have two choices," she told them firmly. "You can ignore this moment and hope it blows over, or you can use it as an opportunity to grow. The choice is yours, but trust me, the world will be watching." With that, she walked past them, heading toward the gate. The crowd parted to let her through, many offering words of encouragement along the way. Some called her brave, others called her inspiring, but none of that mattered to her. What mattered was the message she was sending, not just to her company but to everyone listening. Back at the gate, the flight crew scrambled to make amends. The captain personally invited her back onto the plane, apologizing profusely and assuring her that she would receive VIP treatment for the rest of her journey. She accepted graciously, not because she needed special treatment, but because she understood the importance of leading by example. Holding grudges wouldn't solve anything. Forgiveness, paired with action, could create real change. As she settled into her first-class seat, the other passengers greeted her warmly. A businessman seated nearby leaned over and said, "Ma'am, if you ever need someone to speak on your behalf, count me in. What happened to you today was wrong, plain and simple." Others echoed similar sentiments, creating a sense of unity among the travelers. Strangers became allies, united by a shared desire for fairness and justice. Meanwhile, the airline executives gathered in a private lounge, frantically discussing how to handle the fallout. Social media was already ablaze with posts about the incident, and news outlets were calling nonstop for comments. The pressure was mounting, and they knew they had to act quickly, or risk damaging the company's reputation beyond repair. But the woman wasn't focused on revenge or punishment. As the plane taxied down the runway, she closed her eyes and thought about the bigger picture. This incident wasn't just a personal affront. It was a wake-up call for the entire industry. If airlines, and society as a whole, continued to judge people based on superficial traits, progress would remain elusive. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but it had to start somewhere, and she was ready to lead the charge. When the plane finally lifted off the ground, soaring high above the clouds, she opened her eyes and smiled. For the first time since the ordeal began, she felt a glimmer of hope. This wasn't the end of the story, it was only the beginning. The days following the incident were a whirlwind of media attention, public outcry, and internal soul-searching within the airline. The story spread like wildfire, not just locally, but globally. Social media platforms lit up with hashtags like "respect for all" and "bias in travel," as people shared their own experiences of being judged or mistreated based on appearances. News outlets couldn't get enough of it. Interviews, opinion pieces, and debates dominated headlines for weeks. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next. Would this woman sue the airline, fire everyone involved? Or would she use her position to push for real change? But instead of reacting impulsively, she took her time. She knew that anger, while valid, wouldn't solve anything in the long run. This wasn't about revenge, it was about transformation. So, she called an emergency meeting with her leadership team at Skyward Wings. When they gathered in the boardroom, the tension was palpable. No one knew what to expect. Some braced themselves for harsh words or firings, while others hoped for leniency. She walked into the room quietly, dressed professionally but without any pretense. Her presence commanded respect even before she spoke. After taking her seat at the head of the table, she looked around at the executives and said, "Let's start by acknowledging the truth. What happened at Gate 27 wasn't just a mistake. It was a symptom of something much bigger. Bias doesn't exist in isolation. It's rooted in assumptions, stereotypes, and systems that have been allowed to persist unchecked." Her words hit hard. For many in the room, it was the first time they'd truly confronted the reality of systemic discrimination. Sure, they had diversity training programs and mission statements about inclusivity, but those were often more performative than impactful. Now, faced with undeniable evidence of their shortcomings, they couldn't look away anymore. "We're going to Fix this, she continued, her tone firm yet compassionate. Not because we have to, but because it's the right thing to do. And not just for me, for every single person who steps foot on one of our planes. Travel should be a joy, not a source of anxiety or humiliation. With that declaration, she unveiled a bold plan. Over the next few months, Skywright Wings would launch a comprehensive initiative aimed at addressing bias and fostering inclusivity across every level of the company. The program would include mandatory training sessions for all employees, from flight attendants and gate agents to pilots and executives, focused on recognizing unconscious biases and challenging harmful stereotypes. It would also involve creating accountability measures to ensure these lessons translated into real-world behavior. But she didn't stop there. She announced that the airline would partner with organizations dedicated to promoting diversity and inclusion, particularly in industries where marginalized groups were underrepresented. Scholarships would be established to support women and minorities pursuing careers in aviation, from engineering to piloting. Uniforms would be redesigned to reflect cultural diversity, featuring patterns and colors inspired by different communities around the world. Feedback mechanisms would be put in place so passengers could report incidents of discrimination anonymously, knowing their voices would be heard. As news of the initiative broke, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Passengers praised the airline for taking responsibility and committing to meaningful action. Industry experts hailed it as a groundbreaking step forward, urging other companies to follow suit. Even critics who had initially questioned whether the CEO's response would go far enough admitted that she had set a new standard for corporate accountability. Meanwhile, the individuals directly involved in the original incident, the flight attendant, the gate agent, and the security personnel, faced consequences, though not the ones most people expected. Instead of firing them outright, the CEO decided to give them a chance to grow. They were required to participate in leadership workshops designed to build empathy and understanding. These workshops weren't easy. They forced participants to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and the ways their actions impacted others, but they were transformative. One of the flight attendants later recounted how the experience changed her perspective. "I used to think I was good at reading people," she admitted during an interview. "But I realized I wasn't seeing them. I was making snap judgments based on things like clothes or hairstyles. Now, I remind myself every day that everyone has a story I don't know. It's made me better at my job and honestly a better person." The gate agent echoed similar sentiments. "I'll never forget the look on her face when we told her she didn't belong," he said. "It haunts me. But I'm grateful for the second chance I've been given. I want to make sure no one else feels the way she did that day." While the changes happening behind the scenes were significant, the impact extended far beyond the airline itself. People began sharing stories of their own encounters with bias, not just in travel, but in workplaces, schools, and everyday life. Conversations about privilege, prejudice, and representation gained momentum, sparking movements that reached far beyond the aviation industry. Teachers started using the incident as a case study in classrooms, encouraging students to think critically about fairness and equality. Celebrities and activists amplified the message, reminding the world that progress requires effort from everyone. For the CEO, the journey wasn't without its challenges. There were skeptics who accused her of grandstanding, claiming she was using the incident as a PR stunt. Others argued that her approach was too soft, insisting that stricter penalties were necessary to send a stronger message. But she remained steadfast, trusting that education and empathy could drive lasting change. Months later, data began showing promising results. Reports of discriminatory incidents within Skywright Wings dropped significantly, thanks to the new protocols and training programs. Employees reported feeling more empowered to speak up when they witnessed unfair treatment, and customers praised the airline for its renewed commitment to respect and dignity. One passenger wrote in a review, "Flying with Skywright Wings feels different now. It's not just about getting from point A to point B, it's about being treated like a human being." Despite the progress, the CEO knew there was still work to be done. Change wasn't something that happened overnight. It required constant vigilance and dedication. Still, she felt hopeful. Every apology, every act of kindness, every moment of growth brought them closer to a future where people weren't judged by their appearances, but by their humanity. And as she stood on the tarmac one evening, watching another plane take off into the sunset, she allowed herself a rare moment of pride. This wasn't just about fixing a broken system, it was about building a better one. One where everyone, regardless of who they were or what they wore, could feel like they belonged. Months turned into a year, and the changes at Skywright Wings began to take root in ways no one could have predicted. What started as an initiative born out of a painful incident grew into something much bigger, a movement that not only transformed the airline but also inspired others in the industry to rethink their own practices. The CEO's decision to focus on education, accountability, and empathy instead of punishment proved to be a turning point, both for her company and for the people who worked there. For the employees involved in the original incident, the flight attendant, the gate agent, and the security personnel, the journey wasn't easy. At first, they struggled with shame and guilt. How could they have let bias cloud their judgment so completely? They replayed the scene over and over in their minds, cringing at every misstep. But as they attended the leadership workshops and participated in discussions about unconscious bias, something remarkable happened. They began to heal. The workshops weren't just lectures. They were interactive sessions designed to help participants confront their own assumptions. Role-playing exercises forced them to see situations from different perspectives. For instance, one activity involved pretending to be a passenger being judged unfairly by staff. Another required them to write letters to someone they had wronged in the past, reflecting on how it felt to hurt another person unintentionally. These exercises weren't comfortable, but they were necessary. Slowly, the employees started to understand why their actions mattered, and how even small decisions could have big consequences. One afternoon, during a group discussion, the gate agent spoke up. His voice trembled as he admitted, "I used to think I was doing my job by following rules, but now I realize that sometimes sticking too rigidly to those rules can cause harm." That day at Gate 27, I didn't stop to ask questions or listen. I made assumptions based on what I saw, and because of that I failed, not just the passenger but myself. His honesty opened the floodgates. Others chimed in, sharing their own struggles with bias and self-awareness. A flight attendant confessed that she often treated passengers differently, based on how they dressed, admitting that she subconsciously associated wealth with importance. A supervisor talked about how he had once dismissed a complaint from a traveler because he thought the person was overreacting. Each story added depth to the conversation, reminding everyone that bias isn't always intentional, it's ingrained in societal structures and personal experiences. Over time, these conversations began to shape the culture within Skywright Wings. Employees became more mindful of their interactions with passengers. Instead of jumping to conclusions, they asked questions. Instead of making assumptions, they listened. The shift wasn't immediate, but it was noticeable. Passengers noticed too. Reviews poured in praising the airline for its improved customer service. One frequent flyer wrote, "It's like the entire vibe has changed. Everyone seems genuinely happy to help, and I feel respected no matter which class I'm flying in." Meanwhile, the CEO continued to lead by example. She traveled frequently, often mingling with passengers and chatting with crew members to get first-hand feedback. During one such trip, she struck up a conversation with a young mother traveling alone with her toddler. The woman explained how nervous she had been about flying after hearing stories of parents being scolded for their children crying on planes. "But your team made us feel welcome," she said, smiling. "They offered snacks, helped me carry my bags, and even played peekaboo with my son. It meant the world to me." Moments like this reminded the CEO why she had fought so hard for change. This wasn't just about improving numbers or avoiding bad press. It was about creating an environment where people felt valued and cared for. And as word spread about Skywright Wings' efforts, other airlines began reaching out for advice. Some implemented similar training programs, while others partnered with diversity organizations to promote inclusivity. The ripple effect was undeniable. Back at headquarters, the CEO introduced additional initiatives to keep the momentum going. Uniforms were redesigned to reflect cultural diversity, featuring patterns inspired by art from around the globe. Flight routes were expanded to underserved regions, ensuring that travel remained accessible to communities often overlooked by major carriers. Internship programs were created specifically for students from underrepresented backgrounds, giving them hands-on experience in aviation careers. Every step forward reinforced the company's commitment to breaking down barriers, not just for passengers, but for employees as well. Of course, challenges still arose. Not everyone embraced the changes right away. Some longtime employees resisted the new policies, claiming they were unnecessary or overly sensitive. Others argued that focusing so much on bias detracted from operational efficiency. But the CEO stood firm, reminding her team that progress rarely comes without pushback. "Change is uncomfortable," she told them during a town hall meeting. "But if we're serious about building a better future, we have to be willing to face that discomfort head-on." Her determination inspired many to push through their doubts. Over time, even the skeptics began to see the benefits of the new approach. Customer satisfaction ratings soared, employee morale improved, and the airline's reputation reached new heights. Awards rolled in, recognizing Skywright Wings as a leader in corporate responsibility and innovation. Yet despite the accolades, the CEO never lost sight of the bigger picture. For her, success wasn't measured by trophies or headlines. It was measured by the lives touched along the way. As the anniversary of the incident approached, preparations began for a special event at JFK Airport. The terminal where it all happened would host a ceremony honoring the lessons learned and celebrating the progress made. Passengers, employees, and industry leaders were invited to attend, along with media outlets eager to cover the story. The mood was electric, filled with anticipation and pride. On the day of the event, the terminal buzzed with energy. Displays showcased the airline's journey, from its humble beginnings to its current status as a beacon of inclusivity. Photos of smiling passengers and dedicated employees lined the walls, accompanied by quotes about resilience and unity. In the center of it all stood a plaque commemorating the incident, inscribed with the words, "True greatness isn't defined by appearances, it's measured by character." When the CEO took the stage to speak, the crowd erupted in applause. She smiled warmly, taking a moment to soak in the atmosphere before addressing the audience. "This plaque isn't just a reminder of what went wrong," she said. "It's a symbol of what can go right when we choose to learn from our mistakes. A year ago, I stood here feeling humiliated and angry. Today, I stand here feeling hopeful and proud, not because of anything I've done alone, but because of what we've accomplished together." Her speech moved many to tears. Passengers hugged employees, thanking them for their hard work. Employees hugged each other, celebrating how far they'd come. Even the critics who had doubted the initiative couldn't deny its impact. As the ceremony came to a close, one thing was clear. This wasn't the end of the story. It was a new chapter, one defined by growth, compassion, and the belief that everyone deserves to belong. And as the CEO walked away from the podium, surrounded by cheers and applause, she knew the journey was far from over. There would always be more work to do, more lessons to learn, and more hearts to touch. But for now, she allowed herself to savor the moment. After all, change starts with a single step, and she had taken hers with courage and grace. Years passed, and the story of the woman who turned a humiliating moment into a transformative movement became the stuff of legend. It wasn't just her resilience that people remembered, it was the ripple effect of her actions. What started as an isolated incident at an airport gate had grown into something far greater, a blueprint for how individuals and industries could confront bias, embrace inclusivity, and strive for real change. Her legacy wasn't defined by wealth or power, but by the lives she touched and the barriers she helped dismantle. The airline itself flourished under her leadership, not because it prioritized profits above all else, but because it put people first. Passengers noticed the difference immediately. The staff greeted them warmly, regardless of which class they were flying in. Complaints about rude treatment dwindled, replaced by stories of kindness and understanding. One elderly man traveling alone wrote to the company saying, "I've been flying for decades, but this is the first time I felt like someone actually cared about me as a person." Another passenger, a young woman traveling internationally for the first time, shared how nervous she had been until a flight attendant went out of their way to make her feel comfortable. "They didn't have to do that," she wrote. "But they did, and it changed my whole experience. These moments weren't accidents. They were the result of intentional effort." The training programs introduced years earlier had become ingrained in the culture of Skyrite Wings. Employees now approached every interaction with curiosity rather than judgment. They asked questions instead of making assumptions. They saw passengers not as stereotypes but as human beings with unique stories and needs. This shift didn't just improve customer satisfaction, it created a sense of purpose among the staff. Many employees reported feeling more fulfilled in their jobs, knowing their work mattered beyond just keeping planes running on schedule. The CEO's influence extended far beyond her own airline. Other companies began adopting similar initiatives, inspired by her example. Industry conferences featured panels on diversity and inclusion, with leaders discussing how to implement meaningful change within their organizations. Schools started teaching her story in classrooms, using it as a case study in leadership and empathy. Even outside the aviation world, people found inspiration in her journey. Entrepreneurs, activists, and everyday citizens rallied behind her message, applying its principles to their own lives and communities. One of the most profound impacts was seen in the next generation. The scholarships established by Skyrite Wings opened doors for countless young people from marginalized backgrounds. Students who might never have dreamed of working in aviation suddenly had opportunities they couldn't have imagined before. A teenage girl from a small town stood up at a scholarship ceremony and said, "When I look at planes in the sky, I don't see limits anymore. I see possibilities." Those words echoed the CEO's own childhood dreams, proving that representation matters, and that breaking barriers can inspire others to do the same. Despite the accolades and recognition, the CEO remained grounded. She continued to travel frequently, often sitting anonymously in coach to listen to passengers' experiences firsthand. During one such trip, she struck up a conversation with a middle-aged man seated beside her. He confessed he'd been hesitant to fly after a bad experience with another airline, where he'd been treated poorly due to his appearance. "But your team made me feel welcome," he said. "It reminded me that there are still good people in this world." Her response was simple yet powerful. "We're all just trying our best. Sometimes we mess up, but what matters is how we choose to move forward." That philosophy guided everything she did. Even as Skyrite Wings grew into one of the largest airlines in the industry, she refused to let success distract from the mission. Every decision, from expanding routes to designing uniforms, was made with inclusivity in mind. When critics questioned whether the focus on social issues detracted from business goals, she responded with quiet confidence, "Profit without purpose is empty. If we're not helping people, then what's the point?" As time went on, her presence in the public eye diminished slightly, not because she stepped back, but because she encouraged others to step forward. Young leaders within the company began taking charge, carrying the torch she had lit. The flight attendants who once struggled with bias became mentors, teaching new hires the importance of empathy and respect. The gate agents who had doubted themselves learned to trust their instincts while staying mindful of fairness. Everyone played a part in sustaining the culture she had built. On the 5th anniversary of the incident, the CEO returned to JFK Airport, not as a victim, but as a celebrated trailblazer. The terminal where it all began had been transformed into a hub of innovation and inclusivity, symbolizing how far they'd come. As she walked through the bustling space, employees stopped to thank her, passengers waved in recognition, and children stared in awe, unaware of the history unfolding around them. At the center of the terminal stood a new exhibit honoring her journey. Photos, videos, and artifacts told the story of that fateful day and the changes it sparked. Visitors could listen to audio recordings of passengers sharing their experiences or watch interviews with employees reflecting on their growth. At the heart of the display was the original plaque from the first anniversary event, now surrounded by quotes from people whose lives had been impacted by her work. During the ceremony, the CEO took the stage one final time. Her voice shook slightly as she addressed the crowd, not from nerves but from emotion. "This isn't my story," she said. "It's ours. Every single person here has contributed to this journey. The passengers who demanded better, the employees who worked tirelessly to deliver it, and the communities who believed in the possibility of change. Together we proved that progress is possible when we refuse to accept the status quo." The applause that followed was thunderous, lasting long after she stepped away from the microphone. As she mingled with attendees afterward, strangers approached her to share their gratitude. Some hugged her tightly, tears streaming down their faces. Others simply nodded, unable to find the words to express what her efforts had meant to them. For the CEO, these moments were worth more than any award or title. In the years that followed, her name became synonymous with courage, integrity, and innovation. Textbooks included her story as an example of how adversity can fuel transformation. Documentaries explored her life, highlighting both her struggles and triumphs. Yet despite the fame, she never sought the spotlight. Instead, she focused on nurturing the next wave of leaders, people who would continue pushing boundaries and challenging inequalities. When she finally retired, handing over the reins to a diverse team of executives, the airline celebrated not just her achievements but the foundation she had laid for the future. Under her guidance, Skywright Wings had become more than a business. It had become a symbol of hope. Hope that no matter who you are or where you come from, you deserve to be treated with dignity. Hope that mistakes can lead to growth if met with humility and determination. And hope that even the smallest acts of kindness can spark monumental change. As she boarded a plane for the last time as CEO, she looked out the window at the runway below. Planes lined up neatly, ready to take off toward distant horizons. Each one carried passengers embarking on new adventures, facing challenges, and chasing dreams. Somewhere among them might be another child staring up at the sky, imagining a future full of possibilities. With a smile, she leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes. The journey had been long, but it had been worth it. After all, true greatness isn't measured by appearances. It's measured by the lives you touch along the way. And hers had left an indelible mark on the world.